Glad to see you this evening. Erev Tov, Erev Mivarach. May it be a evening that is full of blessing for everybody. Just a couple quick announcements as we begin our class tonight. Number one is a loving reminder that there is no class next week. It is Wednesday before Thanksgiving. We are doing things at CBST, but we are not doing this thing at CBST. And you can catch up on any class recordings that you didn't yet get to see. And then we will be back in session the following week, the first week of December. But if you're looking for us at 6 p.m. on Wednesday night next week, it's not us, it's you on that particular day. What else did I want to tell you? There will be arriving in your inboxes on Monday a Lehrhouse class evaluation. And so you can fill out evaluations for as many Lehrhouse classes as you're taking. If you're also taking Hebrew classes, we want you to give us feedback on that. And I very, very much want to hear your feedback about this particular class. I've been reaching out to like a couple people, but we're about halfway through the semester next week. I want to hear any course corrections that we should do. And then also, lovingly, I might ignore you, depending on what the feedback is. I know that not every teacher is every student's cup of tea, and that's completely fair. So you will receive that in your inboxes on Monday. Please, please, please fill out evaluations. This is how teachers become better teachers. This is how I become a better teacher. And I'm really eager to hear what you think of the class. Finally, I just came from our Vad Tefillah. So some of you know that at CBST, Shabbat services don't just happen out of a vacuum. They take a ton of planning and dedicated conversation. And every week, the leadership team meets to discuss the tefillah, the prayers for the week. And as I was in that meeting, we're doing Ana Bechoach, a really beautiful Kabbalistic meditation.
I'm happy.
Of the Kabbalat Shabbat service. Marilyn is very excited about it.
Happy.
It's not that it's never been done at CBST. It's just not as commonly done at CBST. And when we were kind of speeding through the Kabbalat Shabbat service, I mentioned it and then said we weren't going to look at it very closely. And I was like, oh no, Ana Bechalach is going to happen. And we didn't study it together. And I definitely didn't prep it. So when we come back in December, we are going to be looking at Ana Bechoach together. I wanted to give you that sneak peek so you could look forward to it on Friday night and then look forward with equal anticipation into diving into the beautiful Hebrew that makes up this poem, but not tonight. Tonight, we're going to be focusing on the beginning of the Mariv service, specifically the Shema Uverchotecha, the blessings that surround the Shema, especially on the theme of love. Together, we're going to be looking really closely at Ahavat Olam, the Shema, and the Ve'ahavta. However, the Ve'ahavta is more than it seems. We're going to look at the beginning of the Ve'ahavta together, the part that literally goes Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha. We're going to dive deep into that Torah Hebrew. And then with the remainder of class left to us before 7 p.m., it can be choose your own adventure and also sort of like a to-do list for me to prepare over our class break, that if the class is very interested in studying additional pieces of the Ve'ahavta, the other biblical selections that make up this recitation 3 times a day at every Jewish service, I would be delighted to do so. But I didn't want to presuppose that you wanted to learn about the seat over God controlling the weather. So eager to hear where your interest lies and happy to follow that direction at the end of class. Does that sound good? The very first thing I wanted to do was, in my wishing to hear some feedback, I was reminded that not everybody went to rabbinical school and has the same vocabulary around Jewish textual history that I've been just kind of like flinging out willy-nilly, sometimes with dates and sometimes with not. So I wanted to take just a minute for us to look at a timeline of what came when. I'm going to put the link to this particular timeline, which I like a lot because it is so visual and it has so much information packed into it. It is not the end all be all of timelines, but if you'd like to look at it more leisurely on your own time, that's fantastic. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to take a brief jaunt through Jewish textual history. Is this big enough? I'm going to try and not hover over anything in particular. Lisa Brown, can you give me a thumbs up if this is sort of like big enough to see? Great. You're the first person on like my Zoom camera reel, so that's why I'm asking you.
We can make it bigger ourselves on our screen.
You can make it bigger yourself. It is very true. I can also zoom in closer if the general consensus was way too small. All right. So in this timeline, we're looking at the text of Jewish textual history. When were these different books written? Remember that sometimes the authorship of these books is a huge question mark, and it's also not necessarily monolithic. So when we talk about the Torah, for instance, literally the 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, we're talking about a range right here. And these like supposed dates, I keep hovering over people's names and it keeps like popping up. Oh, do you want to know about Noah? No, thank you. The voice that's in the book of Genesis, which may be of priestly origin, is very different than the voice which is in the book of Deuteronomy, which is already in the period of Kings, possibly based on its Hebrew. So don't just take this timeline's word for it that the entire Torah was written in the year roughly like 1500 BCE. Know that it's more complicated than that. But that's about when we're talking about the 5 books of Moses. And then we get into the Nevi'im, the books that make up our Haftarah portions, especially the prophets. The prophets of action, you can see down here, Elijah and Elisha, and the prophets of sayings of like Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And then we get into, oh, stop hovering over things. Oh, so annoying. Okay. We get into the period of the Mishnah, which is, you know, the Zugot, like Zug means pair in Hebrew. So Hillel and Shammai. Akiva and Elisha ben Abuya are just before the beginning of the Common Era, which of course we recognize we're using phrases like before the Common Era and Common Era, where other people are using BC and AD, before Christ and after the death of Christ. But that is where we're drawing the line. Those pairs of thinkers who are narrated in the Mishnah happen just before the dawn of the Common Era. And then we get into the Gemara, which is the Talmud, more colloquially called. You see that this stretches the period of those who are active in the Talmud, the stories that are told about them, is until the year roughly 500 CE. And then the Savoraim are some of the compilers of the Talmud. The Geonim, that genius generation, which is responsible for many of the post-rabbinic prayers that we've been looking at, you know, especially when we were talking about the blessing of the candle lighting, that's the Geonic period, which is reaching until just after like 1000 of the Common Era. But much of the prayers that we have been looking at, their source is in biblical Hebrew, back to the Torah, back here, or the Amidah, especially, we're going to look at this, lays out is a rabbinic invention during the era of the Talmud and the Tanaim and the Amoraim in this period, when so much of our prayer was codified, when we really see ourselves talking about how to pray instead of necessarily like how to address God, because so much of that context in the Torah was about sacrifice. So just that little bit of introduction. Of course, you can peruse at your own leisure. I also have a very sweet video from a children's corporation called Bim Bum, which tells a beautiful story of like the order of the sacred text in Judaism, and I'm really happy to share that one too. And then the other thing I wanted to show you is a nice visual representation of the prayers of the Ma'ariv service. So here we are, my friends, straight from my People's Prayer Book. Lisa, can you again give me a thumbs up if you can see from Baruch Hu to Geula, call to prayer and redemption? Nice, okay. So this is what we're going to be focusing on tonight, and then next class as well, though we'll definitely make time for Ana Bechoach. This is the core of every Jewish prayer service, whether that is Shacharit in the morning, Mincha in the afternoon, or Mariv in the evening, having to do with the recitation of the Shema, Kriyat Shema, which literally means recitation. It's the same word we use for when you're chanting Torah on Shabbat. Most of these are part of one particular rubric, and then the Amidah, which also is repeated through those 3 services, is separate. But you have, sorry, I hear myself echoing in somebody's mic. So if your mic is on, do turn it off, or else your teacher gets like terribly distracted. These blessings, why they're called blessing 1, blessing 2, blessing 3, is because they can sometimes vary depending on whether it is morning or evening. Specifically in the one that we're looking at today, first you get called to prayer with the Baruch Hu, and then you have a creation blessing. In the morning, it's Yotzer Or, the prayer for dawning light, and in the evening, it's Ma'ariv Aravim, as evening falls. So you have your creation blessing here. You have a revelation blessing, some kind of Birkat HaTorah, a mention and an honoring of the gift that is Torah and the way that it outlines the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And so we're going to look really closely at the evening version of that tonight, Ahavat Olam, that we recite in Friday night services. And in the morning, on Saturday mornings, and on any morning of the week, it's called Ahava Rabbah, great and abounding love. And these themes are pretty parallel, no matter what time of day it is. So you're changing the language a little bit, and we'll talk about how that happened. The Shema itself is made up of these 3 passages from Deuteronomy and then from Numbers. Notice that's not in chronological order. If you're crackerjack at being able to name the books of the Bible in order, you know that Numbers comes before Deuteronomy. We'll talk about that. And then the blessing that follows the Shema is Geula, redemption. And within it, it has Micha Mocha, the prayer that the children of Israel recited, the song of the sea as they were leaving Egypt, moving towards the promised land. The language does change from morning to evening, but the prayer is the same. So this is where we are situated in terms of the Friday night service. We already did all of Kabbalat Shabbat over here that you never see on a weekday because it's extra special. It's the way that we receive Shabbat as it comes into our lives. You move into what is formula, what has to be a part of every Jewish service. With the call to prayer and the blessings that surround the Shema, and then you enter into the Amidah. Just an interesting note is that many of you know that there are certain mitzvot in Judaism that can't be accomplished without a minyan, without the full community of 9 people and a Torah scroll at least surrounding you. The Baruch Hu is one of those things, but you can say these blessings even if you're not a part of a minyan. All right. So, friends, do we have any questions about these core aspects of Jewish services? Anything quick and dirty about the history of the text that we've been looking at that maybe I haven't elucidated quite so clearly as when we were going through the Kabbalat Shabbat section?
Minutes.
Okay. I hear somebody thinking about it. Lisa's got a question, and then Sherry, and then Cantor Allen. Yes. So go ahead, Lisa. Lisa, you are not yet unmuted.
Okay, it's the banner covers up my unmute command.
Oh, I know, it's the worst.
You're not going to want to answer this question now, and don't answer this question now. But it's something that I'm curious about, which is that the Mishnah comes out about 50 or so years after the New Testament. They come out about the same time. The Mishnah's first words are in the days of the temple, and Jesus says, "I am the temple." And I always wonder if that's an answer to, if that's sort of a, I just wonder about the juxtaposition of those two things.
So fascinating. You're right. A topic for another semester entirely.
Right.
But maybe, I see that Harold Levine is in the class tonight, and Harold has been a part of interreligious dialogue with Marble Collegiate Church. Harold, if you have any resources that maybe you could refer to Lisa and anybody else who is interested about the rise of Christianity at the same time that Rabbinic Judaism is organizing itself and its text, put them in the chat. Or I know you can email Lisa directly because you email about other things too.
Rabbi, I may email you so that you can send it to the students.
Deal.
I don't have
Sounds
anything
good.
right
I have
now,
a
but I'll
whole
come up
class
with something.
roster.
Okay, great.
Happy to do it. And good question, Lisa, even though we're totally not going to talk about it. All right, Cantor Allen, go for it.
Just a clarification, nothing else. So this is definitely the rubric for, for Shacharit and Ma'ariv, but not for Mincha, because we don't.
Right, because we immediately
totally
jump into Torah, jump into Amidah.
Exactly. So, and I'm wondering, I always assumed that the reason why this was not included is because the Shema is mentioned as being said both in the evening and the morning and not in the afternoon. So we don't say it in the afternoon. So we can't say the surrounding blessings either. But is there anything else to that? Maybe just the motivation, like, oh my God, people are not going to want to take so much time off of work. We're just going to make this really short. Or, have you heard anything else, other than that reason?
That's amazing. I need to look it up and I'll bring it back to our next class. What is the reason that our Mincha service is so different from the character of our morning and evening services? And it may be, we're going to look at the literal and also the poetic of what it means when you rise and when you lay down, when you're on your way. That's all within the Shema tonight. So I will report back after our break. All right, Ruth, and then we're going to start looking at Ahavat Olam. Go ahead, Ruth.
I wanted to ask about the history of the liturgy. I know in the Talmud, they talk about the Amidah as being the prayer.
Yeah, HaTefilah.
HaTefilah. When did the Shema and the surrounding blessings get added to the service?
Ruth, I'm so glad you asked. It's like I planted you. Let's dive in. So Ahavat Olam is one of these prayers that Ruth is talking about surrounding the Shema, and it is notably not rabbinic, and it is not Torah either. So when I was on Anabachoa, let me scroll through Lachadoti. Get us to the right page for Ahavat Olam. If you are in the CBST door itself, your physical copies, you can find us on page, no.
86.
86, here it is. And this is one of those friends that I'm only going to be sharing the Hebrew and the transliteration, and you have to find the translation for yourself on the following page in the CBSTC door. All right, we can see. So the first time we see Ahavat Olam is in one of the very first prayer books that we have. So as Ruth said, when you look to the Talmud, you can find some material about what it means to pray, how you should pray, and specifically about the Shema. There is a lot of discourse about what does it mean to recite the Shema, and where are you supposed to be when you do it? Literally, what position are you in? But the Talmud is not as verbose about writing its own prayers. This comes in the Gaonic period that we were talking about. So the first time we see Ahavat Olam is in sort of the original prayer book, Seder de Rav Amram, which comes in the year 860 of the Common Era. So, you know, vaguely medieval, comes from Babylonia. And this is an answer to a period of responsa where Jewish communities around the world, far flung in the diaspora, might have questions about how are we supposed to practice? Are we doing things right? They would write a she'ela, a question, to the great rabbinic academies in Sura and Pumbedita in what is now modern day Iraq. And they would receive responses to shuva. What are you supposed to do in this particular scenario? And a community wrote and said, what prayers are we supposed to say? In what order? And so as a response to that, Rabbi Amram wrote a seder, wrote an order of prayers. And so obviously these prayers were in the water beforehand. They are somewhere falling between that Talmudic period and the era of the Geonim. They're very hard to date. We have some Geniza fragments that say that there are lots of beautiful different customs about what you're supposed to say surrounding the Shema, and especially before the Shema. Psalm 80 was common in a certain Egyptian community for those of you who are also Psalm students. But when you finally nailed it down and said, really, rabbis, what prayers are we supposed to say in what order? This is the answer that we were given. What's also very interesting is in the evolution of the way that different streams of Judaism geographically invented the service for themselves. Ahavat Olam, which Ashkenazi Jews associate as an evening prayer, is also said before the Shema in the morning in Sephardic rite, in Jews of Spain, Portugal, and some reaches of the Ottoman Empire. It isn't that uncommon for you to see like a particularly Babylonian and then a particularly Palestinian, that being the land of Israel, divergence on a bunch of these different ritual aspects. So it's not identical, but it does have the same beginning, Ahavat Olam, as the evening prayer, both for morning and for evening in the Sephardic rite. So what does this prayer say? Can I have a reader to read a couple sentences in the Hebrew? And I know it's difficult, but try not to sing it to Debbie Friedman's melody when you do. Let me know. Great. I see Lisa. Gonna unmute Lisa. Go right ahead.
Ahavat Olam, Beit Yisrael, Amcha, Ahavta Torah.
Okay, pause just for a second, and I'm gonna pause you periodically. So Ahavat Olam, the word Olam is encompassing of immensity, both in time and in space. We might say an eternal love, a universal love, an endless love. There is no sense of gvul, of boundary or fence around it. You wonder why it's Ahavat Olam and not Ahava Olam, one great love. This is in the smichut format. It's an idiomatic phrase that the parts work together. It's like a compound word. So that's why you get the hey ending changed to the tav. Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta. So Amcha, your people, Ahavta, you loved. This is Israel speaking to God. This is not narrating for God, but speaking to God. Keep going, Lisa. We were on Torah.
Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadta.
So what is the definition of love here? And of course, you know, there are many, many different definitions of love out there in the universe. This one is particularly didactic. How are we shown the evidence of your love? Torah, mitzvot, rules, laws, you taught to us. And so this is very similar to the vision of God as parent. God providing sort of educational advice, shaping the way that we are to understand the world. When we get to the Torah passages of the ve'ahavta, you're going to see a very different definition of what it means to love somebody. Keep going, Lisa.
Al ken Adonai Eloheinu v'shochbenu u'v'kumenu nasiach bechukecha.
Great, keep going.
V'nishmach b'divrei Toratecha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed.
Great, pause at the period. So Ruth asked, why do these blessings end up surrounding the Shema? And some of the thinking around this is when you lie down and when you rise up. B'shoch b'cha, notice the kamatz katon, slightly larger kamatz than anything else. Uvekumecha, and you're rising. Remember kumi ori from Lecha Dodi, rise up. Yeah, the bride is here. Nasiach, we will discuss. Sicha is the noun form of siach for discussion. Bechukecha. So when we lie down and when we rise up, we're going to be in constant discussion about your laws. V'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, we will rejoice. Beit simchat Torah, here's that root for simcha, in your words of Torah, u'b'mitzvotecha, and your commandments. Leolam va'ed. This is an idiom that means like forever and ever, amen. You can still have the word olam by itself, as you've got up here, but this is a real sense of time rather than like encompassing of both spatial and temporal, time and space. Keep going, Lisa. Kihem chayenu.
Kihem chayenu v'orach yamenu uvehem nege yomam v'layla. So hard not to sing this.
I know, right? You're doing a great job. Let's pause there just for a second, because they, and we're going to see in the ve'ahavta this constant reference to like these, they, those, this one. It's a very frustrating sort of pronoun, but it's this idea of Torah and mitzvot being encompassed. Kihem chayenu ve'orach yamenu, they are our life and the length of our days. They lengthen our days, which is also a riff on Proverbs. Uvahem, and on them, negeh yomam v'layla, we're going to reflect daytime and at night. You're going to see that sense of like how often you should be thinking about it. You can read this as either, so both of these, b'shoch b'cha uvkumecha, yomam v'layla, you have these two opposites, right? Lying down, rising up, daytime, nighttime. You can read them as dualities. Do it at both these specific times, or you can read it as a merism, which is a poetic word that means encompassing of the whole. So a great English version of this is head to toe, right? You know that when you're referring to somebody who's decked out head to toe, yes, they might be wearing a great hat and great shoes, but they're actually like just beautifully dressed all the way through. So maybe it's all the way between, from lying down and rising up and everything in between, day and night and everything in between. You could read it either way. All right, Lisa, finish us up.
Va'ahavtecha al tasir mimenu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael.
Gorgeous. So how nice that we have this word, ve'ahavtecha, and we're going to hear ve'ahavta very, very soon. So there's all of this connective tissue between these prayers. Don't ever remove this from us for eternity. Blessed are you, Adonai. And we'll talk about the bracha formula when we get into the Amidah a little bit more, and the rabbinic innovation of a formula that you would say to say like, aha, we are blessing now. Why did they choose those words in that order? But what are we blessing right now? God, who is the lover of God's people. Oh, at the end of the word is his people, Israel. All right, I'm going to pause just for a second, although I'm happy to bring the text back up. I see that Ruth has a question about, usually Hebrew sentences have the verb at the beginning. Why are the verbs at the end of these first two sentences? Great observation, Ruth. I'll put us back into the language itself. So Ruth is asking, you've got this compound noun here, ahavat olam, instead of ahavta im ahavat olam, you loved us with an unending love. Why is the syntax like that? It may be a poetic function in terms of, the theme of the blessing is right up front. However, remember that just like any language, Hebrew doesn't really have hard and fast rules. I think that so often our ears are accustomed to hearing verbs at the beginning of Hebrew sentences, and it is the way that a lot of even modern Hebrew syntactically works, but especially because of Torah Hebrew, which is just like verb after verb after verb after verb. That doesn't mean that it has to be the way that all sentences work, but it's a really good observation. Other questions about Ahavat Olam itself? Oh, Lisa is noticing a very close homophone that I also always think about, hiding versus like removing. Ahavat Olam, lover of everlasting. Very interesting. So usually if you would make this sort of the pronomial noun, lover instead of love everlasting, you would have the noun function like ohev instead of ahava. And so that's why I would translate it in this way. Every translation's an interpretation and is often very highly political. So Lisa, I think you've got grounds to translate this in the way that you see fit. Can you say more about why the Ahavtecha is written so large? Yes, absolutely. And then Marcia can also chime in. So Dave wanted to talk about this particular word. Why so large? Why does it have an asterisk there? The
And what does it
reason.
mean also?
Oh yeah, the asterisk was also part of your question?
No, what the whole thing means.
Oh, the whole thing. So same root here, ahav, techa, and your love, and your loving don't remove from us. But why is it so big? This is a visual signifier for how services are heard. So this is, we might sing Debbie Friedman's version to Ahavat Olam, but it ends right here. I know Lisa was like trying to control herself and not sing along. Yomam v'layla. This is when we return to the nusach of the service. And it's also indicating that the chatima of the prayer, the seal of the prayer to which the congregation might respond when the cantor says, Baruch atah Adonai, or Brucha at Shechina, we would respond, Baruch u'Baruch Shemo, or in non-binary Hebrew, Vruche u'Vruche Shemeh. This is the signifier in traditional Jewish communities that like, okay, your mumble session is over, we're all coming back together again. However, when we get to the Shema, the size of the letters matters a lot.
Very interesting.
Gonna stop that share. And the seal on the blessing, the chatima, I'd love to talk about more when we get to the formulaic nature of the rabbinic liturgy. But just to say briefly right now, blessings end with an evocation of honoring God's name. We don't just kind of trail off into nothing. The Ve'ahavta is a notable exception to this. We end it with Adonai Elohechem Emet, but that's because it's literally lifted from Torah and it's not a rabbinic or a Gaonic invention of prayer. All right, Cantor Allen, and then we're moving into the Shema.
Just a technical thing that as a cantor, I was taught that when you say the Chatima, Baruch atah Adonai, you don't pause. You don't want people to say Baruch u'Baruch Shemo, because you're not supposed to be putting any sort of a barrier or a stop before, because you're supposed to go right smack into the Shema. So I even try to like speed that up, Baruch atah Adonai, Havamo Yisrael, and then just right into it so that there's no pause. People, we were told even don't even give them time to say Amen there. It's just right, boom. Same reason why Ga'al Yisrael at the end, the Geula, you whisper it so that people don't say Amen before the Amen.
So the halacha around reciting Shema is something I absolutely wanted to talk about. Thank you for being my plant. You may notice there are lots of directions in services. Please rise. We turn now to this song of liberation. That's one that like I always recite almost verbatim. But they don't happen between Ahavat Olam and Shema. You're supposed to slide right into it. Why is that? It's also not specifically a halacha. There was a lot of argumentation around it in the Geonic period, with people saying that this is a way that you honor God's name. So you don't want to cause any interruption. You also want the Hebrew to be heard as a consistent theme straight through. However, exceptions can be made for, you don't want there to be just like general conversation, but because this is a Torah reading, if there is an important direction that you need to give people so that they can be more fulfilled in their offering of the Torah reading, you should do it. And also, if it's going to embarrass somebody otherwise. For instance, in Reform congregations, people stand for the Shema. This was a Germanic invention at the very beginning of the origins of Reform Judaism in the 1800s, that this is the watchword of our faith. This is the one sentence, the mission statement of Judaism. If it's that important, we should be standing, right? Well, halakha tells us that we should recite Shema in whatever position we happen to be in at the time. The Reform movement wanted to make a special emphasis on this. And so they would say, please rise, both to give honor, that's exception number one, and not to cause embarrassment. If everybody else is standing up and one person's sitting there being like, what are we doing right now? That would embarrass them. You don't want that to happen. Otherwise, you don't put any like responsive material between Ahavat Olam and Shema. You don't put one of the beautiful Rami Shapiro reading that's in our Siddur in between those two things. So let's look at the Shema. Here we are. To David's question about why is Ve'ahavtecha so large, you can see that there are two letters, and this is also true in Torah scrolls, these two enlarged letters of the Shema. And there are two different midrashim as to why this would be so. One of them says that the word aid, ayin daled, means witness, and so this is a witness to one of the most important things you can say as a Jew, that God is one. I'm trying to remember what the other one was that, oh, right. We don't want people to accidentally slur and say Adonai Acher. There are lots of lookalike letters, and Dalet and Resh are one example of those. And if you said, you know, Adonai is our God, but Adonai is Acher, Adonai is other, well, that's no good. So you want to make sure that enunciation is especially clear. Adonai Echad. This is a direct lift from the book of Deuteronomy. It's not the only, it shows up in a couple different address places. So for instance, you've got Hear, O Israel, in Deuteronomy 5, 9, 20, 27. It's a thing that the author of Deuteronomy, who we lovingly call the Deuteronomist, was pretty confident in saying. But this particular citation is directly biblical. This one, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, is not. That might be why you say it belachash, quietly. So this is supposed to be said out loud, and on Kol Nidre we say, and on Yom Kippur we say both parts of the Shema in equal volume, and we get loud, loud, loud as we're repeating the recitation. But you're supposed to say this part quietly. Although in the Reform movement, you say parts at equal volume, because again, this was supposed to be the thing that was most important to the Jewish people, so you should be loud and proud about it. A fascinating theory that Rabbi Larry Hoffman puts forward is that we might have punctuated this wrong. This might not be one run-on sentence. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Blessed is the name which is honored, or the honorable name of His Majesty forever and ever, which, like, even in Hebrew doesn't grammatically make a bunch of sense. It's not just a fault of the translation, like the syntax is very weird. He suggests, what if the period goes here? Baruch Shem, blessed is God's name. Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, the glory of God's kingdom is everlasting. And this is said perhaps that this is one of the responses that was offered in the temple by the priest. And it would kind of make the sentence make more sense if we had it in 2 sentences instead of in 1. So food for thought, my friends. This note up here says that some people cover their eyes when reciting Shema Yisrael. And this is an opportunity for focus in the same way that some people draw their talit over their head for the Amidah to kind of like block out any distractions. I was also taught at summer camp, so I really can't tell you its source, that you make a 3 with your fingers, put it on your forehead for a shin, and then cover your face like this. But it wasn't in my people's prayer book or in any of my liturgy notes, so I can't attest as to why exactly we do this. And I am kind of skipping over the Shema because, friends, this is an advanced Hebrew class. I kind of expect you to know what Shema means. But an interesting point here being Shema coming from the root of lishmoa, to listen, often translated as hear. When rendered into American Sign Language, as Rabbi Darby Lee, who was a former Kuperburg rabbinical intern at CBST, Kuperburg Ritmaster rabbinical intern, when he translates this into sign language, for those who are deaf or hearing impaired, this is not the way that you would take in this information. So he makes the sign, instead of to hear, he makes it focus, which is also pretty similar to the direction that we see up here about what you are supposed to do with your kavanah, with your intention as you recite Shema. I just thought that was a beautiful like translation note into another language. But here we are at the Ve'ahavta. This part is from Deuteronomy 6. Can I have a Hebrew reader? Ira! Yes, please, try not to chant it in Hebrew.
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך.
Okay, pause just for a second. Quick note, these colon marks function as periods when you're doing biblical citations. And since this is literally a lift from the Bible, that's why we do it. So same root as we ended and as we continued to repeat through Ahavat Olam, and you shall love. This is the Vav HaHipuch, the consecutive Vav, which is very common in biblical Hebrew and completely uncommon in Mishnaic Hebrew and going forward. When you would look at this, if you didn't have the Vav there and it was just ahavta, that's the past tense, right? You have loved. When you have the Vav consecutive here, this moves it into the future tense, and you shall love instead of you have loved. So if you ever wondered why it is that you've got all of these past tense endings, and Vayomer Adonai El Moshe Lemor, even though Yomer is in the future tense and masculine pronoun, God said to Moses, Vayomer moves it back to the past tense. Instead of God will say to Moses, God said to Moses. So you shall love in the future, going forward, Adonai your God, Bechol Levavcha, the name of our Sidur, with all of your heart, Uvechol Nafshecha, with all your soul, Uvechol Meodecha. So you can see this as a merism, right? These are all the possible ways to love God, with your heart, with your mind, with your soul, with all of your being. And that's really beautiful. But something that I found fascinating, one of my professors, Professor Mark Bretler, whose biblical Hebrew classes I took at Brandeis, noted that in the ancient Near East, in the kingdoms that surrounded the Israelite kingdom, this was a very common way to begin vassal suzerain treaties. This means the treaty of the overlord with those who he is stomping on. Any conquest government who took over a place, especially common in Assyrian, northern Mesopotamian documentation. I've got a notation right here from the early 7th century. Love the crown prince Ashurbanipal, son of your lord Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, as you do your own lives. That sounds kind of reminiscent of what you're supposed to do here. And so while we've got that theme of love, boundless love, the love of a parent, the love of a great teacher with a student and an investment in their growth, the hafta can be seen as, a multifaceted love that doesn't just take your mind, but also your heart and your body, or, choose one out of those three. But it also can be read as a really clear hierarchical statement. Who is the king here who rules over all of the people Israel? It's God, and you need to love God. You need to love that ruler completely. Your loyalty cannot waver. It's a very interesting idea. Keep going, Ira, with the Hayu Hadivarim.
והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך.
Beautiful. So we're going to see lots of those. Remember those frustrating sort of pronouns. These are the words. Which are the words? The rabbis of the Talmud interpret this as the words of Torah, all of these mitzvot. And this is one of the reasons why the Shema paragraphs are in this order, with this particular Deuteronomy 6 section coming first, saying like all the things that follow. All of those mitzvot, those are the ones, asher anochi mitzavcha hayom, that I am commanding you this day. You should keep them al levavecha. You should keep them on your heart. All of the things that are going to follow. The next paragraph is talking about, if you don't, and especially if you forget that there is only one God and you start lusting after other gods, and terrible things are going to happen to the weather. And the final one is the injunction that you should wear tzitzit, that you should have a concrete physical reminder, literally like a string around your finger saying like, oh, I shouldn't forget that. I shouldn't forget to follow these mitzvot, all of the ones that are enumerated. So that's why, even though it's chronologically ordered that like the Numbers paragraph should go first, we start with the Deuteronomy. Okay, keep going, Ira.
ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך.
Beautiful. So here we have again that gorgeous merism. When you lie down and when you rise up, you should talk about them when you sit, from yoshev, yeshiva, when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the way, lech, like lecha dodi, when you're going. And you should teach them to your children, and you need to speak about them all the time. Basically, whatever position you're in and everywhere in between. Go ahead, Ira.
וקשרתם לעבד על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך.
And you should bind them as a sign upon your hand. And it's probably not that they meant you should get these leather cords and call them phylacteries and make the specific pattern on your arm. It's probably more like they should be with you all the time. But this is the citation that we take for tefillin, and you have this little paragraph inside the boxes on your tefillin. And it helps you literally keep them between your eyes for frontlets, which again is not an English word that translates into English very well. And you should bind them for a sign upon your hand. And finish us up, Ira.
What is that? Can you say, what does that mean, bind?
Bind? Well, it literally means to tie. Sharet.
Oh.
So
Hard to visualize it.
yeah, and it's hard to know what the Bible really meant here. You should bind
Yeah.
them for a sign upon your hand.
Right.
The Bible wasn't a major fan of tattooing or piercing. Those were
I was going to
signals
ask that.
of being a slave. That, you know, there's whole Deuteronomic sections about like how you mark your slaves, and it's with ear piercings, which is what my father told me when I told him I wanted to get my ears pierced. But it's not as concrete as what comes after in the paragraph about tzitzit, about literally like tie it with a beautiful blue strand of techelet. That's where it gets really concrete. So maybe it's more of the merism, that like you're always holding it in your hand and you always see it in front of your face, no matter what you're doing. All right, Ira, finish us off.
וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך.
Gorgeous. And again, what the Deuteronomist probably didn't mean is make a tiny casing, but make it really pretty and have it match your decor and put it on the doorways of the place where you live. But that's how the rabbis interpreted it. This is an opportunity to keep the words literally on the doorpost of your house, which is what mezuzah means. Beitecha, your house, uvisha arecha, and on your gates. So I promised my friends that we would take a little time for you to sort of like determine the course of our next direction. Here, let me go back to the sharing of the screen so you can see the passages that follow. When we return, when we also study Ana Bechoach, I promise, would you like us to investigate more this biblical passage? Again from Deuteronomy, the Haya im Shemoa Tishmoru. And if you definitely listen, Shema, to all of these mitzvot, follow them, then good things will happen. And if you don't, bad things will happen. Would you prefer to focus on the Vayomer Adonai el Moshe Lemor, the directions that God gives to Moses, tell the children of Israel to make for themselves tzitzit on the corners of their garments? Or would you like to move straight into Geulah, the redemption blessings? You can vote in the chat. You can think about it a little bit. The chat always gets sent to me after the class, so know that I'll tally the votes and see where we're going. And then, of course, if anybody has questions about the Ve'ahavta itself, raise a hand, put in the chat that you would like to speak. I'm also just going back into the chat so I can catch up with some of the conversation that's been happening. Conservative Judaism, why don't they rise for the Shema except so conservative Jews do not rise for the Shema because you're supposed to say it in whatever position you were previously in, and you stood for Baruch Hu, but you sat down for Ahavat Olam. So you don't change your position for Shema. And it's true, Harold, this is also a differentiation in terms of like what posture you take when Kodesh is recited, Mourner's Kodesh, or any of the Kodeshes that signal a transition in our service, like Chatzi Kodesh or Kodesh Shalem. Isn't past tense a modern concept in Hebrew? Dorina, you do have like definite past tense that these things were done going as far back as Torah Hebrew. But there is, that consecutive tense does tend to complicate things. And again, if anybody has a direct question that they want to raise their hand or unmute themselves, happy to answer. All right, I'm seeing a lot of let's go to redemption. But Jesse had a question, go ahead.
I learned about three different midrashim about the quiet response to the Shema.
Yeah.
I learned the one that actually it came from Moses, who heard the angels singing it and he didn't want anybody to know he was stealing it.
Oh, all right.
And
So
then-
this is the way that we put quotation marks around angels.
Yeah.
Lovely.
And then there was the one about how when Israel was dying, his sons came in and they said to him, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leila. They were trying to reassure him that they would remember, that they'd remember. And now I forgot the last one.
Well, those are two beautiful ones.
They are.
I like them very much. So the environmental aspects that Ira was mentioning in Vahaya im Shemoa, on the page of the Siddur is a beautiful commentary by Judith Plaskow. And she was one of the, original feminist theologians widely published. She has written more about this than just the tiny sublinear note that we put on the page. So I will get that for you. And it can be a wonderful source for study. I wasn't sure how to treat that paragraph as the Shema. And, whenever the prayer leader would invite people to please read the biblical passages at your own speed, I just jumped straight to the seat one because I didn't really see a representation for Vahaya im Shemo in a way that I was comfortable with until I opened CBST's Siddur and read that piece by Judith Plaskow. It's really beautiful. Yeah, Lisa.
So here, I've never understood this. So what is the Shema? Is the Shema all of these paragraphs, or is the Shema just this one Shema that we, is the
Great
Shema all-
question, Lisa. And I think a lot of it comes from your Jewish education and who sort of shaped that for you. So if we're getting really technical, Kriyat Shema does cover all of those paragraphs. Shema isn't over until you've said that section from Numbers. Although there is a lot of differentiation, and I know certainly in the Reform movement, it's the two one-liners. It's Shema from Deuteronomy, and then it's Baruch Shem as a response to it. But people were arguing about that as late as the Mishnah. It says that this is the way you have to do it. And the Geonim eventually agree because there is so much differentiation that they want everybody to match. The Geonim would love us to match, and we never end up doing so. And Amram says at the end, no, for serious, you have to do all three of those sections. That doesn't mean that people always listen to him. I love Cantor Allen's suggestion that Shema is the topic sentence for this whole paragraph of the thesis that is Jewish prayer. Lovely. So we will continue, not next week, but the week after, with a study of liberation, the Geulah blessing about redemption. I will share with people who are interested more about the environmental impacts that you can read into the Shema, especially in our modern world. And you will give me some feedback about how the class is going for you when that evaluation lands in your inbox on Monday. And also, we're going to be not so sneakily dropping it into the chat during the classes that follow. So you have ample opportunity. It doesn't have to be by the time our next class session meets. I always want to hear from you. So it was a delight to spend this evening with you. Maybe I will see you for Shabbat. It's a beautiful Shabbat this week, culminating this week honoring transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer Jews with our Trans Day of Remembrance Shabbat service, led by Rabbi Kleinbaum and our Ba'aleh Tefillah, Zevi Berman. You will see the non-binary Hebrew Chatimot in our service, and I would be delighted to discuss them at greater length. There are lots of ways that different creative and fantastic groups of people are working to make the binary gendered nature of Hebrew more inclusive. This one particular non-binary Hebrew project out of Denver is the one that we've highlighted, but there are many others. And immediately prior to services, at 5 p.m. for those who identify as trans, non-binary, or genderqueer. There is a special gathering led by Zevi and by Ariel Zitney, the director of our Trans Jews Are Here convening this year. And for all of us who identify as allies, Rabbi Moskowitz and Rabbi Menachem Creditor from the UJA are going to be having a conversation about allyship at 11 a.m. on Friday. And if you're newish to CBST, you wanted to learn a little bit more about our community, you wanted to introduce yourself since we're working with a virtual lobby situation here. After services on Friday night, Lynn and Sally are going to be the gracious hostesses of a Zoom oneg along with other members of our amazing CBST hospitality team, a little get to know you. If you're a very well-known member of CBST and you want to come hang out with us, we're going to hold you till the end of the get to know you section so that we can really focus on those who are new and newish to our community. So lots of really lovely things. And I hope to see you over Shabbos. I wish you an early Shabbat Shalom and a whole week of blessing until we see each other at the very beginning of December.
Thanks.
Erev Mevorach, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
An absolute pleasure, Dorina. It's always so nice to see you.
Good holiday.
Thank you. Thank you.
Toda Rabbi, Rabbi, you did a great job.
Bevakasha, you're welcome, Randy.
As an executive director in a university, I'd hire you in a nanosecond.
Aw, thanks. That means a lot to me.
Thank you, Rabbi. Everybody stay safe. Our numbers
Bye.
are starting up, okay?
Thank you, Mickey. You stay safe too. Bye, Carol. Bye, Lisa. Bye, Larry. Bye, Scott. Bye, Judy. Bye, Dorina.
Bye.